It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am Dr. John Dentico, your host. With me today is Andrew Muir Wood. Andrew is the lead research advocate for Yelos, a community for researchers navigating rapidly evolving technology and corporate mindsets. He's the founder of Muir Wood and Company, a research strategy consultancy in London. He's been working in innovation for 15 years, has a PhD in product strategy from Cambridge, and now he works with product leaders who are in the early stages of building customer-centric products. Clients include global brands such as Condé Nast, Mozilla, and Deliveroo. But he also works with a lot of startups as clients via accelerators like Google for Startups and the World Food Program's Innovation Bootcamp. At the start of the pandemic, he and three friends started Meals for the NHS, a charitable organization that raised £1.8 million and delivered 300,000 meals to medical staff around the UK. I am pleased and truly honored to have him here with me today. Hello, Andrew. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me here.
Oh, great to have you. And someone who's put in that kind of effort during the pandemic is certainly someone to be noted and your work celebrated. We'll get on with our time here today. Andrew, you speak of changing behaviors as a result of the pandemic. Can you list for me three of the changes businesses are making or need to make in the wake of the COVID pandemic?
So, something that we encountered a lot during the pandemic was that people are much more comfortable with digital video conferencing technologies. So that move online, which was just happening gradually, was accelerated by the pandemic. And so everyone can use Zoom now, where you'll remember that in 2019, if you tried to get a relative or maybe a client who was less tech savvy on a Zoom call, then you probably would have to talk them through that process. Whereas nowadays, everyone has it. So that's been a big shift. I think that in education, there's a very interesting and challenging shift that has happened for young people, which is that there's this whole swathe of young people that had part of their education delivered remotely or missed out on the experience of those last couple of years of school or the first couple of years of college, university. And so I think that's another key area of people who are still coming back from that situation. And then I think the other more macro shift is that there was this hold on spending at the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone kind of froze. And then there was a rush of spending. I don't know about your business, but 2021 was a huge year for my consultancy commercially and for people in my industry, researchers. Lots of hiring. Everything seemed to be going great. It seemed I'd backed a winner. But then in 2022 and 2023, we globally, there's been a more of a recession and that spending has stopped. And actually, we've seen a lot of people working in innovation who have been made redundant. And my company, in my work, I've had to work much harder to sell and to acquire customers in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think those are three knock-on effects for different categories of people that the pandemic created.
Very interesting. Do you see things changing at all now in the UK in terms of business growth, for example?
Yeah, so this year for me, it started to pick up. So that if people are starting to realize that you can't stop innovating, forever. It might be something you can cut to save in the short term, but ultimately they're starting to come back to it. So I'm getting some. The signal for me is that I get more inbound, so more people coming in, more referrals, more people just unprompted looking for help with things, and so that for me is a signal that it's coming together. But I know that there's still a lot of people in my community, researchers in particular, that are still hunting for jobs, and I think there's a lot of applications per job. So it's not all the way there, but there's definitely signs of recovery in the UK.
So you're in a mid shift, if you will,
I'd say so.
of the,
And you try to be optimistic, but I think you have to be careful not to put all your eggs in one basket and assume that it's going to come back to the levels that it was at before.
yeah, good thinking. One of the things that I picked up from your bio was that you talk about the need for leaders to listen with greater intent to the changes in customer behavior. So the question is, at this point, are they listening more intently to customer behavior, or is it the other way around? Are our leaders barely listening to their customers?
I think it's a mixture. So I think some leaders are really starting to get it, and that customer centricity is a massive factor, and huge brands like Amazon have put it at the center of what they do and have shown that it works. I think that there's less of a need to make a case for learning from customers, researching customers than ever before. So everyone's starting to realize that it's necessary. But I think that the the quality of the insights that are coming from those conversations and the questions that are being asked is very mixed. And so that means that not every leader is getting the same quality of information and the same impactful insights that they should be getting in order to make decisions.
Very interesting. I'm a great believer in the idea that if you take care of your people, will take care of you. Okay. It's always been, in fact, it was one of the themes of my book. So here's the question. For years, we've heard about taking care of your customers, listening to your customers. I get that. Okay. But the question I always ask is, are you listening to the people who work for you, who serve the customers? To me, I think that's the first echelon, if you will. Are you getting the feedback from your people? Are you listening and are you paying attention to your people? Any reflection on that? And what do you see in that world?
Absolutely. If I'm starting to work with a client, particularly a client that had a B2B client that has end customers, often the first port of call for me is to speak to the sales team and customer support team, because they have not just that first-hand contact with customers, but also uh, such a huge volume of contact that they will have inevitably started to think about trends in their minds. And these trends are probably the beginnings of the insights that I might be uncovering through a deeper research project. And probably those people would be the ones that would be rolling their eyes and saying, this is all obvious at the end of the project, because they already knew this, but maybe they didn't have the way to express it. And a really good way for researchers to make friends in an organization is to start with those people and ideally include them in the research, to treat them as a stakeholder at the start, to ask them for advice on who we should be speaking, to also ask them for help to get access to those customers, and then to keep them involved as you start to find things start to emerge, insights start to emerge, and you can play them back to those people and say, how does that reflect what you're hearing with complaints on one side or requests on the other side, on the sales side.
It's interesting. It would seem to me about profoundly simple for leaders before they even talk to their customers to talk to the people who have first contact with them, if you will, who are up against, as I say, nose against the wheel. But apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but apparently there are some leaders that are not listening to their people. Would you agree with that?
I think that can be the case, yeah. And I think there are challenges because the incentives are slightly misaligned for each of these teams. And so for a customer support team, they might be incentivized to just handle as many complaints as possible and get through them, to churn through them, and to reduce the length of time on the phone, or to handle this many complaints per hour. And salespeople obviously have commissions, and they need to bring in the sales. And so those incentives might not necessarily drive those people to capture and share what's really going on with customers. So I think that it helps for them to be guided in the questions that they should be asking, or in techniques for capturing information in a way that is useful for senior leadership, or that is a more strategic way of using that information. A good example is that you might be hearing from your salespeople, or a salesperson might say, if we add this feature or we add this capability to our product or service, then it will make us millions of dollars. But then when you ask them, what's that based on? Turns out it's based on one conversation with one client. And that is, in some organizations that may have gone all the way, and it may have resulted in some product development that may have not ended up making millions of dollars, and then created resentment between product teams, leadership, and sales. A better way of handling a situation like that is to empower the salesperson to build a case and to say, okay, every time you hear a customer talking about this, make sure you really understand the root of the problem. Make sure you capture that, make a note of who they are and what else we know about them and what makes them a great customer for us. And then you start to build essentially a qualitative report that you can then put together and say, I've got these 10 customers. They're all asking for something similar. They all have the same outcome. I know they've got budget available to do this. And therefore, this is a much better case for translating into action. There's a similar example for a structured way for customer support to turn the findings, the themes that are coming back from customer support, into something that is taken seriously across the organization.
Is that where you come in? Do you get involved? Let's say, does your company get involved with, if you will, mining the data and putting the data together in order to create that case, the business case that says, yeah, we should add this feature to our product or service? Is that what your company does?
It's not what my company does, but it's what I often end up encouraging my clients to do. It's where I would start to look before I would ask these people if this information exists. I'd ask if it exists in a structured way. Often it's not. And then I would encourage them that in future, maybe they should be trying to capture this in a structured way. And then we wouldn't be in the problem that required me to come in the first place. Because then what I'll be doing usually when I'm brought in is to gather new information, to go out and speak to customers and gather a new round of data from those customers directly. So if that could have been avoided by adding one more question to the sales process, or taking slightly different notes, or following up, probing a little bit more during the customer support service, then this might have been avoided.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I was talking to a previous guest. Is it just an aside here about communication in an organization, and he told me, and I was just bowled over by this. He told me about a particular case that he was involved in, where people working in the same organization, whose work and products were interrelated, had worked in this company for 12 years and have never met each other. That I said, wait a minute. We started years ago in this notion that we had to break down silos, that we had to, in effect, create that crosstalk. And I said, you're telling me this is still going on? And he goes, oh, yeah, no, yeah, it's happening. And I was bowled over by it, that there's this lack of crosstalk, communication amongst people who could really benefit from the knowledge each other had. And so one would think that communication has been solved, that we have all these electronic capabilities to reach out anywhere across the world as we are right now, and the information would flow. And it's still not, in some degree, maybe in a large degree, happening. So I find that to be so interesting. Any comments from you?
Yeah, I agree. The silos still exist, especially in larger organizations, and it's often to do with trust and incentives. So there may have been a situation where that trust is broken down. Often I find that the trust between the product team and the sales team in organizations making digital products and services, that trust is broken down, where the product believes that sales will say anything to close a deal, and sales believes that product are just working on academic projects and not actually working on things that are going to close deals and create value for the customer. And probably both are slightly right. And that once that barrier exists, then it's very hard to break it down, these things sustain themselves. I think that's where researchers can come in and straddle this and try to break down those barriers or move information between teams. And I think that often researchers will be fit into one silo and then not realize that actually that maybe there's a bigger role for them to as a way of relaying and gathering information across the organization. And actually in doing so, they can build trust with these other stakeholders, and those stakeholders can help them out in the future because they can give them access or information or early warning on things that will help them to gather better insights.
I couldn't agree with more. Trust is huge to me. It's the transcendent value. If you have it, you're great. If you don't have it, it's hard to get a really great product out the front door, in my opinion. And mutual trust, which is really, you've just talked about that. The idea that it's not just the leader trusting the people and the people trusting the leader, but the groups have to trust one another because they're in constant communication with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting. And you think these problems have, they're probably gone away. They're solved. No, no, they're still there. And, and it's just amazing. And I wonder sometimes if it's just a bad habit or other things are going on. And I think you answered that with partially, at least, with this idea of incentives. What's my incentive to go communicate with the other folks? Other than it might make my job a bit easier. I might have information that will help me make a better decision. Oh my goodness. What an idea. What a thought. And yet it's still such a barrier. One of the things that you mentioned in our workup is this notion of leaders ending up separated or abstracted from reality, which results in them not getting the real story. In your opinion, why is this happening? Now, you may have covered a bit of it already, so I don't mean to be redundant here, but to me, when you say they're not in touch with reality and they're abstracted from reality, it's such an eye catcher. I have to ask you about it.
Yeah, I think that I don't think we've covered it fully previously. And I
Okay.
think that it comes to do with when you, especially in organizations that have hundreds of thousands of customers, uh, there's this idea that in order to understand the customer needs, you have to have this massive statistical significance. And so then you do a lot of quantitative work, and that quantitative work then goes through the teams that are analyzing it, and each of those teams has their own incentives and targets. And so by the time it reaches very senior people, that they're not really hearing the full story of what it's like to be a customer and what a day in their life feels like. What they're hearing is that our NPS score has gone down from 8.3 to 7.9, and our goal is to try to increase it again. And so it's which is it's still important to have these targets and to be measuring and to be doing these things across demographics. But I feel like there's this sort of detachment from just the reality, and that reality, I'm biased because I'm a qualitative, more centric person, but I think that reality comes from direct exposure, hearing the voice of the customer in their own words, seeing them using your product or using a competitor's product, understanding them in the context of their work or their day-to-day life, doing the things that are relevant to your product or service, seeing them struggle with it. And you can still you can still curate that so that you see a representative mix. This is a good example of someone from this segment, and this is a good example of someone from this segment. So it's definitely important not to just base it on watching one person, but at the same time, I think that we need to find this balance of breadth and depth in order to rebuild that empathy for leaders who are too abstracted from their customers.
Very interesting. I'm a big believer in what I call the dual methodology. And I use a metaphor of the human body to explain it. Quantitative to me is like the bones in a human body. Okay. And qualitative is the skin and the muscles. So, in a sense, you have to have both because you have to really understand the numbers for sure, but you also have to tell you what the numbers are really telling you. And as you say, the only way you're going to get there is listening to the customer's real voice. What are they saying? What are they feeling? They might say, yeah, we're okay, but we're not feeling like it's really going where we want it to go. We need something more here because that has a way of shifting, I'm sure, the ideas, shifting the perspective of people. So I agree. You have to have both. And then you have a picture, you have a complete picture of whether or not the data whether you're not, and let me just say it this way, whether or not you're interpreting the data correctly, as you well know, because numbers can tell us a lot of things, but what are they really telling us? So it's very interesting to me. Do you think, do you have any ideas of, just off the top of your head here, how you think leaders or what leaders can do themselves to listen more closely to their customers and employees?
I think it's about making time for it. A lot of the clients that I work with, particularly when I'm working with senior teams, they're just so busy. It's just back to back meetings. And hour they're just in and out of meetings. And that means that to take the time to actually do qualitative work, storytelling, understanding context means making that time available, and then time to listen and time to process what you've heard. And I think that in today's commercial world, it's just so hard to find that time. So you have to carve it out. One way that I like to do it is to create moments where leaders can listen in. So I'm running an interview at this period, this time. You can listen in the background, and you can, if you have questions, you can feed them to me. I'll ask them. Or if you don't have time to join in real time, then of course you can watch the recording. But there's something really powerful about it happening in real time. So I think that, again, researchers are a great way to create that time to try and fit it into the schedule of the senior leadership team. Whether you're researching externally or internally, just getting leaders uh, onto the call, listening in, asking questions, listening to the answers, and then hopefully that would then build that empathy, and so they have a better understanding of what's going on in their minds.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in this idea of strategic thinking. I actually created a strategic thinking process that's worked well, as opposed to strategic planning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference, the best way to look at it is the simplest way is that strategic planning looks to find answers to questions, and strategic thinking makes sure you're asking yourself the right questions. Because we know that their companies go out of business all the time. $1 billion companies no longer with us. Were they asking themselves the right questions? I don't think so. And there comes a time, and the metaphor I use, the other metaphor I use, is this idea of buying an old house and renovating it. Okay, you walk into
Mm-hmm.
this old house, it's a great house, but it's got all this wallpaper on and paint and all these different things, and you really want to bring it back to its wonderful state. And you recognize that the only way you're going to do that is you have to take all that paper off the walls, you have to strip the walls and get the paint off and do all this kind of stuff. Start from the base. And that to me is strategic thinking. You want to get it all out, get all the paper off the wall, strip it down to the basics, and then ask the question. Things like, where do we go from here? What's our mission? What's our real mission? One sentence mission. A mission statement to me is not something you hang on the wall and people, you got a mission statement? Yeah, it's over there.
Mm.
It's which happens in too many organizations. You got to live it, you got to breathe it. And a lot of organizations don't do it. They still go, oh, Mr. Sager, please. One sentence, galvanizing. This is what we do. This is who we are. And I think it's so important. And then that helps. It helps scale down the enormity of the jobs that or the tasks that lay ahead. So just some response to your ideas, which I think are incredibly worthwhile. So let me, as we get to the end here, let me ask you my favorite question, and that is, if you had a magic wand and could wave it at an issue or a problem that you see in the world in which you live, what would it be, and why did you choose that?
Yeah, so I think that it's going back to what we talked about before. It's having leaders allocating time to listening more, to whether that's to their customers or to their employees, but carving out that time in their calendars, but also making sure that the questions that are being asked are the correct questions when they're listening, and also being guided towards how to interpret the answers. So sometimes what people say they need needs more interrogation. So making sure that they're being guided towards what it actually means, what their employees or customers actually want, and I think making it unfiltered. So making sure that we don't have this abstraction, whether that's from you know over quantification or from AI just glossing over everything. And I think it also just needs to be habitual as well. A lot of clients where they save everything up for this one big, we're going to do this one big research project, and we got to have all our questions ready, and we have to do it. We're going to do it in November, and then that will be all the research for the next year or maybe longer. And whereas I think if it's a bit more habitual, there's less pressure on it. What do we have any questions for our monthly or weekly or fortnightly check-in with customers, with employees? Then it just becomes a thing and becomes a habit, becomes something that you build into your process. And I think that would be the ideal situation. I see it in some companies. I think other companies have some way to go in that.
Let me ask you this question because you brought it up and I wanted to ask it, and that is, how do you see the integration or or implication of AI in the work that you do? How is it going to help you, and how is you might find it, in a sense, becoming a barrier to the good work you do?
I think I'm in equal parts excited and terrified of AI. I think that it massively speeds up qualitative research. So there's tasks that previously would involve combing through transcripts, through reams of text, that AI can do in a split second, which is amazing. The downside of that is that I could have charged for that time. So there's no, it's like a lawyer charging by the hour. There's no incentive for lawyers to be faster. And it's the same with somewhat with researchers. There's not an incentive to do it faster. So I think that that's an interesting paradox for consultants, but it is powerful. It means that you could, you know, a more positive way of looking at it is I might do in a project, I might interview 10 or 15 participants. Actually, now I can interview 30 participants across a wider set of segments to maybe go deeper on certain characteristics. And because analysis is faster, I can get that slightly bigger breadth. So actually it's increasing my capacity. So that's the answer. I think where it makes me nervous is where it's being used as a replacement, where it creates that abstraction that we talked about before, where it's aggregating, it's glossing over, and it's maybe missing the point, and it's not actually probing or really working out the nuance of what people are saying, and it's just creating sort of themes that we, you know, consume wholesale, and then we don't actually realize what's going on underneath. So I think it needs to be wielded carefully as an efficiency tool that allows us to get more depth and more exposure and use it that way.
Great point. I think in the end, even if you're using it to, it just occurred to me, even if you're using it to get through a bunch of transcripts quickly, in the end, you still have to provide the human oversight to it to make
Hmm.
sure that, again, the message is being transmitted properly, that it's not just pushing something to the side that really matters. So I think even though you might use it, and I think many people recognize this, the human element is still there. It doesn't, it's stupid. It just knows what we tell it, and what it can read on the internet. But in the end, it takes a human being to take it and really makes sense out of it, if you will.
Yeah.
I had a former coach by the name of Ed Temple. I've been quoting him a lot lately because he said something that was just so great. He's an MCC coach from Canada, and he said maybe AI will do 75, 80% of a lot of the redundant work. He said, which tells me that the 20% reserved for humans is going to become even more important. And I think that's absolutely true. It's absolutely right on the money that we have to remember it's not a person, it's
Hmm.
just a support system. I appreciate those good comments. Andrew, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And I want to thank you so much for your time today on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. My hat's off to you and your friends for the phenomenal work you did during COVID for the healthcare workers in the UK. I'm sure they're very appreciative of everything you did for them. So thank you so very much for your time, and I wish you the best in the future.
Thanks for having me, John.
Anytime.